Hello and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Citizen of the Galaxy by Robert Heinlein. Our hero Thorby has been taken to the trade ship Sisu and he's just spent the night in a cabin. And that's about all he knows about the ship. In 20 minutes, he discovered many things. First, the Sisu was much larger than he had imagined. He had never before seen a starship close up, other than from the doubtful vantage of a slaver's hold. Ships in the distance, sitting on the field of Jubal's port, had seemed large, but not this enormous. Second, he was surprised to find so many people. He understood that the Sargon's freighters operating among the 9 worlds were usually worked by crews of 6 or 7, but in his first few minutes he encountered several times that number of both sexes and all ages. Third, he became dismally aware that he was being snubbed. People did not look at him, nor did they answer when he spoke. They walked right through him if he did not jump. The nearest he accomplished to social relations was with a female child, a toddler, who regarded him with steady, grave eyes in answer to his overtures, until snatched up by a woman who did not even glance at Thorby. Thorby recognized the treatment. It was the way a noble treated one of Thorby's caste. A noble could not see him. He did not exist. Even a noble giving alms usually did so by handing it through a slave. Thorby had not been hurt by such treatment on Jubal. That was natural. That was the way things had always been. It had made him neither lonely nor depressed. He had had plenty of warm company in his misery and had not known that it was misery. But he had known ahead of time, had he known ahead of time that the entire ship company of the Sisu would behave like nobles, he would never have shipped in her, Snoopies or not. But he had not expected such treatment. Captain Krause, once Baslam's message had been delivered, had been friendly and gruffly paternal. Thorby had expected the crew of the Sisu to reflect the attitude of her master. He wandered the steel corridors, feeling like a ghost among the living, and at last decided sadly to go back to the cubicle in which he had awakened. Then he discovered that he was lost. He retraced what he thought was the route, and in fact was. Baslam's wrenchawing had not been wasted, but all he found was a featureless tunnel. So he set out again, uncomfortably aware that whether he found his own room or not, he must soon find where they hid the washroom, even if he had to grab someone and shake him. He blundered into a place where he was greeted by squeals of female indignation. He retreated hastily and heard a door slam behind him. Shortly thereafter, he was overtaken by a hurrying man who spoke to him in interlingua. "What the dickens are you doing wandering around and butting into things?" Thorby felt a wave of relief. The grimmest place in the world, lonelier than being alone, is Coventry, and even a reprimand is better than being ignored. "I'm lost," he said meekly. "Why didn't you stay where you were?" "I didn't know I was supposed to. I'm sorry, noble sir. And there wasn't any washroom." "Oh, but there is, right across from your bunkie." "Noble sir, I did not know." I suppose you didn't. I'm not noble sir. I'm first assistant power boss. See that you remember it. Come along." He grabbed Thorby by an arm, hurried him back through the maze, stopped in the same tunnel that had stumped Thorby, ran his hand down a seam in the metal. "Here's your bunkie." The panel slid aside. The man turned, did the same on the other side. "Here's the starboard bachelor's washroom." The man advised him scornfully when Thorby was confused by strange fixtures, then chaperoned him back to his room. "Now stay here. Your meals will be fetched." "First assistant power boss, sir?" "Eh?" "Could I speak with Captain Krause?" The man looked astonished. "Do you think the skipper has nothing better than to talk to you?" "But—" The man had left. Thorby was talking to a steel panel. Food appeared eventually, served by a youngster who behaved as if he were placing a tray in an empty room. More food appeared later, and the first tray was removed. Thorby almost managed to be noticed. He hung on to the first tray and spoke to the boy in interlingua. He detected a flicker of understanding, but he was answered by one short word. The word was fraki, and Thorby did not recognize it. But he could recognize the contempt with which it was uttered. A fraki is a small, shapeless, semi-saurian scavenger of Alpha Centauri Prime 3, one of the first worlds populated by men. It is ugly, almost mindless, and has disgusting habits. Its flesh can be eaten only by a starving man. Its skin is unpleasant to touch and leaves a foul odor. But fraki means more than this. It means a groundhog, an earth crawler, a dirt dweller, one who never goes into space, not of our tribe, not human, a goy, an Auslander, a savage, beneath contempt. In old Terran cultures, almost every animal name has been used as an insult. Pig, dog, sow, cow, shark, louse, skunk, worm. The list is endless. No such idiom carries more insult than fraki. Fortunately, all Thorby got was the fact that the youngster did not care for him, which he knew. Presently, Thorby became sleepy, but although he had mastered the gesture by which doors were opened, he still could not find any combination of swipes, scratches, punches, or other actions which would open the bed. He spent that night on the floor plates. His breakfast appeared next morning, but he was unable to detain the person serving it, even to be insulted again. He did encounter other boys and young men in the washroom across the corridor. While he was still ignored, he learned one thing by watching. He could wash his clothes here. A gadget would accept a garment, hold it a few minutes, spew it forth dry and fresh. He was so delighted that he laundered his new finery 3 times that day. Besides, he had nothing else to do. He again slept on the floor that night. He was squatting in his bunkie, feeling a great aching loneliness for Pop and wishing that he had never left Jubal, when someone scratched at his door. "May I come in?" a voice inquired in careful, badly accented Sarganese. "Come in," Thorby answered eagerly and jumped up to open the door. He found himself facing a middle-aged woman with a pleasant face. "Welcome," he said in Sarganese and stood aside. "I thank you for your gracious," she stumbled and said quickly, "Do you speak interlingua?" "Certainly, madam." She muttered in system English, "Thank goodness for that, I've run out of Sarganese," then went on in interlingua, "Then we will speak it if you don't mind." "As you wish, madam," Thorby answered in the same language, then added in system English, "Unless you would rather use another language." She looked startled. "How many languages do you speak?" Thorby thought. 7, ma'am. I can puzzle out some others, but I cannot say that I speak them." She looked even more surprised and said slowly, "Perhaps I have made a mistake, but correct me if I am wrong, and forgive my ignorance. I was told that you were a beggar's son in Jubalpur." "I am the son of Baslam the Cripple," Thorby said proudly, "a licensed beggar under the mercy of the Sargon. My late father was a learned man. His wisdom was famous from one side of the plaza to the other." "I believe it. Are all beggars on Jubal linguists?" "What, ma'am?" "Most of them speak only gutter argot, but my father did not permit me to speak it, other than professionally, of course." "Of course." She blinked. "I wish I could have met your father." "Thank you, ma'am. Will you sit down? I am ashamed that I have nothing but the floor to offer, but what I have is yours." "Thank you." She sat on the floor with more effort than did Thorby, who had remained thousands of hours in lotus seat, shouting his pleas for alms. Thorby wondered whether to close the door, whether this lady, in Sarganese he thought of her as "my lady," even though her friendly manner made her status unclear, had left it open on purpose. He was floundering in a sea of unknown customs, facing a social situation totally new to him. He solved it with common sense. He asked, "Do you prefer the door opened or closed, ma'am?" "Eh? It doesn't matter." "Oh, perhaps you had better leave it open. These are bachelor quarters of the starboard moiety, and I'm supposed to live in the port purdah with the unmarried females. But I'm allowed some of the privileges and immunities of well, of a pet dog. I'm a tolerated fraki. She spoke the last word with a wry smile. Thorby had missed most of the key words. A dog? That's a wolf creature? She looked at him sharply. You learned this language on Jubal? I've never been off Jubal, ma'am, except when I was very young. I'm sorry if I do not speak correctly. Would you prefer interlingua? Oh, no, you speak system English beautifully, a better Terran accent than mine. I've never been able to get my birthplace out of my vowels, but it's up to me to make myself understood. Let me introduce myself. I'm not a trader, I'm an anthropologist. They are allowing to travel with them. My name is Dr. Margaret Mader. Thorby ducked his head and pressed his palms together. I am honored. My name is Thorby, son of Baslam. The pleasure is mine, Thorby. Call me Margaret. My title doesn't count here anyhow, since it is not a ship's title. Do you know what an anthropologist is? I am sorry, ma'am, Margaret. It's simpler than it sounds. An anthropologist is a scientist who studies how people live together. Thorby looked doubtful. This is a science? Sometimes I wonder. Actually, Thorby, it is a complicated study, because the patterns that men work out to live together seem unlimited. There are only 6 things that all men have in common with all other men and not with animals. 3 of them part of our physical makeup, the way our bodies work, and 3 of them are learned. Everything else that a man does or believes, all his customs and economic practices, vary enormously. Anthropologists study those variables. Do you understand variable? Said Thorby doubtfully. The x in an equation? Correct, she agreed with delight. We study the x's in the human equations. That's what I'm doing. I'm studying the way the free traders live. They have worked out possibly the oddest solutions to the difficult problem of how to be human and survive of any society in history. They are unique. She moved restlessly. Thorby, would you mind if I sat in a chair? I don't bend as well as I used to. Thorby blushed. Ma'am, I have none. There's one right behind you, and another behind me. She stood up and touched the wall. A panel slid aside, an upholstered armchair unfolded from the space disclosed. Seeing his face, she said, Didn't they show you? And did the same on the other wall. Another chair sprang out. Thorby sat down cautiously, then let his weight relax into the cushions as the chair felt him out and adjusted itself to him. A big grin spread over his face. Gosh! Do you know how to open your work table? Table? Good heavens, didn't they show you anything? Well, there was a bed in here once, but I've lost it. Dr. Mader muttered something, then said, I might have known it. Thorby, I admire these traders. I even like them, but they can be the most stiff-necked, self-centered, contrary, self-righteous, uncooperative. But I should not criticize our hosts. Here. She reached out both hands, touched 2 spots on the wall, and the disappearing bed swung down. With the chairs open, there remained hardly room for one person to stand. I'd better close it. You saw what I did? Let me try. She showed Thorby other built-in facilities of what had seemed to be a bare cell. 2 chairs, a bed, clothes cupboards. Thorby learned that he owned, or at least had, 2 more work suits, 2 pairs of soft ship's shoes, and minor items, some of which were strange. Bookshelf and spool racks, empty except for the laws of Sisu. A drinking fountain, a bed reading light, an intercom, a clock, a mirror, a room thermostat, and gadgets which were useless to him as his background included no need. What's that? He asked at last. That? Probably the microphone to the chief officer's cabin. Or it may be a dummy with the real one hidden. But don't worry, almost no one in this ship speaks system English, and she isn't one of the few. They talk their secret language. Only it isn't secret, it's just Finnish. Each trader ship has its own language, one of the Terran tongues, and the culture has an overall secret language, which is merely degenerate church Latin. And at that, they don't use it. Free ships talk to each other in interlingua. Thorby was only half listening. He'd been excessively cheered by her company, and now, in contrast, He was brooding over his treatment from others. Margaret, why won't they speak to people? Eh? You're the first person who's spoken to me. Oh, she looked distressed. I should have realized it. You've been ignored. Well, they feed me, but they don't talk with you. Oh, you poor dear. Thorby, they don't speak to you because you are not people, nor am I. They don't talk to you either? They do now, but it took direct orders from the chief officer and much patience on my part. She frowned. Thorby, every excessively clannish culture, and I know of none more clannish than this, every such culture has the same key word in its language, and the word is people, however they say it. It means themselves. Me and my wife, son John and his wife, us four and no more, cutting off their group from all others and denying that others are even human. Have you heard the word fraki yet? Yes, I don't know what it means. A fraki is just a harmless, rather repulsive little animal, but when they say it, it means stranger. Well, I guess I am a stranger. Yes, but it also means you can never be anything else. It means that you and I are subhuman breeds outside the law. Their law. Thorby looked bleak. Does that mean I have to stay in this room and never ever talk to anybody? Goodness, I don't know. I'll talk to you. Thanks. Let me see what I can find out. They're not cruel, they're just pig-headed and provincial. The fact that you have feelings never occurs to them. I'll talk to the captain. I have an appointment with him as soon as the ship goes irrational. She glanced at her anklet. Heavens, look at the time. I came here to talk about Jubal, and we haven't said a word about it. May I come back and discuss it with you? I wish you would. Good. Jubal is a well-analyzed culture, but I don't think any student has ever had opportunity to examine it from the perspective you had. I was delighted when I heard that you were a professed mendicant. Excuse me? A beggar. Investigators who have been allowed to live there have all been guests of the upper classes. That forces them to see, well, the way slaves live, for example, from the outside, not the inside, you see? I guess so, Thorby added. If you want to know about slaves, I was one. You were? I'm a freedman. I should have told you, he added uncomfortably, afraid that his newfound friend would scorn him now that she knew his class. No reason to, but I'm overjoyed that you mentioned it. Thorby, you are a treasure trove. Look, dear, I've got to run. I'm late now, but may I come back soon? Huh? Why, surely, Margaret, he added honestly. I really don't have much else to do. Thorby slept in his wonderful new bed that night. He was left alone the next morning, but he was not bored, as he had so many toys to play with. He opened things out and caused them to fold up again, delighted at how each gadget folded in on itself to occupy minimum space. He concluded that it must be witchcraft. Baslam had taught him that magic and witchcraft were nonsense, but the teaching had not fully stuck. Pop had known everything, but just the same, how could you fly in the face of experience? Jubal had plenty of witches, and if they weren't practicing magic, what were they doing? He had just opened his bed for the 6th time when he was almost shocked out of the shoes he had dared to try on by an unholy racket. It was the ship's alarm calling all hands to general quarters, and it was merely a drill. But Thorby did not know that. When he re-swallowed his heart, he opened the door and looked out. People were running at breakneck speed. Shortly, the corridors were empty. He went back into his bunkie, waited, and tried to understand. Presently, his sharp ears detected the absence of the soft sigh of the ventilation system, but there was nothing he could do about it. He should have mustered to the innermost compartment along with children and other non-combatants, but he did not know. So he waited. The alarm rang again in conjunction with a horn signal, and again there were running people in the passageways. Again it was repeated until the crew had run through general quarters, hull broach, power failure, air hazard, radiation hazard, and so forth, all the general drills of a taut ship. Once the lights went out, and once for frightening moments, Thorby experienced the bewildering sensation of free fall as the ship's artificial gravity cut off. After a long time of such inexplicable buffoonery, he heard the soothing strains of recall, and the ventilation system whispered back to normal. No one bothered to look for him. The old woman who mustered non-participants hadn't noticed the absence of the fraki, although she had counted the animal pets on board. Immediately thereafter, Thorby was dragged up to see the chief officer. And we will meet the chief officer next time.